So you've got another back, probably a younger, better version of what they tried to do last year with Jonathan Stewart, being able to use Christian McCaffrey, who looks like he's ready to explode, but he needs Cam to be more accurate. We talked about this last year, that Christian McCaffrey's upside could be limited by the fact that Cam's just inaccurate and he's going to miss him on throws. And we saw that happen during the course of the year where you had not only McCaffrey, but other players on that team just wide open at times and Cam missed them. If he can start to add in some of those and get more accurate, then yeah, I think this team can have a very successful year, because based on what they did last year at 11, Vegas has their number set at 9. So when you think about over under 9 wins for Carolina, what do you like with them?
Wow. And see, you're right about this being a bit of a logjam, because you could almost take a dartboard and put 3 pictures of the Carolina Panthers, 3 pictures of the Saints, 3 pictures of the Falcons, and then start throwing darts around and see what order they finish in, first, second, and third. I totally understand where Vegas is coming from. And even when you look at their schedule, again, we'll talk about the fact that they're going to be NFC East and AFC North. Here's the difference with a Carolina, a Falcons, and a New Orleans. A lot of those games are tough for a team like Tampa Bay, whereas a team like Carolina is going to be in a lot of those games. And so when you get to the third and fourth quarter, there's going to be a lot of competitive games there. It's nothing to say that the Panthers could beat Dallas and Washington and Philadelphia and maybe Pittsburgh and throughout the season scattered in there. And I think that's how you get to that 9 number. But 9 for me is, with this team being unsure of where they're at with their offensive weapons, this team for me is the push at 9.
Yeah, I kind of 9 that's a tough number, but again, they won 11 last year. I'm going to go over with them. I think that this division, again, that we saw last year, they had 3 teams that went and won double-digit games, and I could see them and the Saints and the Falcons all beating up on the NFC East and the AFC North. Outside of Philadelphia, there's a lot of unknowns in those divisions. So you take away the Steelers, you take away the Eagles, there's 6 games right there. The NFC South teams would be favored in all of those games. And then you factor in, just like you said, when these teams play each other, these top 3 teams, they're just going to beat each other up. Home field's going to play a major role in this. I could see them all going 3-3 in the division versus each other and just kind of whipping Tampa at that point and getting some extra wins there. So I can see why you went with 9, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that I think their roster is a little bit better this year. They don't have all that controversy with Kelvin Benjamin there. They've kind of got that out. They don't have to deal with an in-season trade. That's all on the table. So I think at this point, I got to go over with them. I got to kind of buy into what they did last year. I'm like you. I've always been a little more negative on Cam just because there's things I don't like how he does and all the press conferences and all that stuff. He's got flair, but at times he just acts like a petulant child, and I just can't get into that with him. But on the field, like you said, there's nobody more fun to watch. There's nobody more fun to play in daily fantasy because he's a guy that can go off and rush for multiple touchdowns and throw for multiple, get a ton of points. He's a fun guy if you just play regular fantasy football season long to watch. So, yeah, I buy into that as well, that he's a super guy to watch. And if he can fix the accuracy, who knows what he can do. So the next team up was a team last year that had their own offensive struggles, and that was the Atlanta Falcons. But even with those struggles, especially early in the season, Atlanta still found a way to win 10 games last year, and they actually went on the road and won a big playoff game versus the LA Rams, which we'll talk about them in segment 2 with the NFC West. Eric, this team is loaded with offensive talent. They went out into the draft. They drafted Calvin Ridley, so the rich get richer. They've got skill players galore on the offensive side. But again, we saw this team and this offense in particular struggle last year once Kyle Shanahan left. Matt Ryan looked a lot more like the quarterback prior to the year they made their Super Bowl run and got beat by the Patriots, but he had a phenomenal year that year. But he looked a lot more like the quarterback we saw in 2014, 2015, and then even into 2016. It was that one season there, 2016, 2017, where he really turned it on. But last year was a bit more of a struggle for him. So, Eric, having another year in this system, having another weapon around him, which Matt Ryan do you think we see leading the Falcons this year? The one that we saw last year or the one that played in that Super Bowl run?
Yeah, I'm actually going to give Matt Ryan credit for this one and go with the Matt Ryan that we saw 2 years ago. I think last year was an anomaly. I really do, and I feel it is an anomaly for the whole team. I think the letdown of that Super Bowl was a lot bigger than what they really like to let on to the general public. So for me, I'm going to say that Matt Ryan, being the consummate professional that he is, you know that he prepares for every season, and I think he prepared for last season, but I think the chip on his shoulder just wasn't big enough. I mean, we've seen other players have chips on their shoulder and actually do something with it. Matt Ryan seemed to kind of crush him under the pressure. Now I think that's gone. That's now 2 seasons in the past. I think this is a totally fresh outlook. I think you've got just more momentum with the offensive unit. And, I think if you have guys like, for example, Julio Jones calling out for big numbers in his contracts, and, you've got to get him the ball, you've got to get him rolling. And then, like you said, with the other offensive weapons in the draft, you're going to have to see things out of the running backs that you saw 2 years ago rather than last year. But all that talent is still there. And so I believe in this team. I actually think that, I know we're talking about them second to last, but I actually think this team, for me, is going to be the best team in this division. So my buddy Todd's going to be glad that I'm all in on this. But for the NFC South, I'm all in on the Falcons.
Wow. All right. Well, you're jumped on board then. I tend to agree with you. And actually looking back last year at the show notes we had on Atlanta, the question that we talked about on them was, would there be a Super Bowl hangover? All the talk was, we've watched the game film and we're over it and we're not going to let it bother us. And boy, they came out and they just seemed like they were like every other team that we see. They couldn't get over it. They were still living in what happened to them in the Super Bowl and falling apart and losing that lead. And we've seen other teams that just lose games or get blown out that come back the next year and they struggle. This was a team that dropped a 25-point lead and just fell apart and fell all over themselves. So you had to think that was going to play a role. This team started to play better and started to look a little bit more like the team that made that Super Bowl run as the year went on. And they went into those playoffs and they were running the football a lot. They weren't really asking a lot of Matt Ryan, but they gave him a mammoth contract. So the expectations are going to be that he's going to come back and be the player that he was in that Super Bowl run, because that's what Atlanta needs from him. They have to have that production out of him, because he has to be the guy that leads this offense and controls things and can get Julio Jones more involved in the red zone and bring along. Again, Calvin Ridley is a rookie. He's talented, but he's still a rookie. So they're going to have to rely still on Julio Jones and Mohamed Sanu. They're going to have to figure out how to get Austin Hooper more involved. He's going to have to become a better blocker to be able to stay on the field longer so that teams can't just key in that when he's in there, they're going to throw the football because he's such a horrendous run blocker. That's been some of the other talk out of camp for them. And then you've got the 1-2 punch with Freeman and Coleman. So, yeah, I expect a lot out of this team as well. We expected that they would have a good year last year. They still got the double-digit wins. It just wasn't the year that we thought they would coming off of that Super Bowl run. But, again, we were worried last year, and we were skeptical that they were blowing smoke and that this loss in that Super Bowl to them was a lot more devastating than they were leading on. That's a year past. Now, hopefully, they've got the ship righted. It's another year under this offensive system. And Vegas, again, as I talked about, there was a logjam at the top of this. Falcons coming off a 10-6 year last year. Vegas has the number set at 9 for them this year, Eric. So I think I know where you're going here. You going the over?
Oh, my gosh. I tell you what, Justin, let's get on a plane. Let's fly to Vegas right now and put as much money.
Hey, man, we don't have to fly to Vegas. Come to West Virginia. We got sports betting now.
Good. So I'll just come to your house and visit you.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Make a trip.
I'm telling you, Justin, we're taking all the savings out of our accounts. We're putting it on the over for the Atlanta Falcons this year. There's no way they're going to be at 9 or under. And the thing I love about this team, and more so what they're looking at with their schedule, is probably the easiest schedule out of the 4 teams in this division, and not because of who they play, but how they play them. They open up the season in Philadelphia, so they open up with an away game, but they get the benefit of not facing Carson Wentz. So although I'm not down on my boy Nick Foles, he's a Super Bowl champion, I think that's going to be a great game on Thursday. And who knows? I mean, I hope the Philadelphia Eagles win, but I won't be surprised if the Falcons are leaving Philadelphia with a victory. And then guess what? They get to go play 5 out of their next 6 games at home. So they catch Carolina, New Orleans, Cincinnati, Tampa Bay, and the Giants all at home. They do have to play away at Pittsburgh, which I think is a coin flip. They're both strong teams. So I believe right before their bye, this team could already be on a 6-1 or 5-2 record at worst. Then they open up with some away games after the bye, but it's Washington and Cleveland, which I think are both winnable games for the Falcons. Then they get at home for Dallas. Then later in the year, at home for Baltimore and at home for Arizona. This team's going to grab a lot of wins, Justin. There's no way they're under 9. So I'm taking the over, and I'm taking it all day long.
Yeah, I agree. I think they'll be over as well. Again, talked about a few minutes ago, the top 3 teams in the division all found a way to win double-digit games. So I'm buying in as well. I like Atlanta. I like what they can do. Hearing you talk about their schedule, I like them even more to get off to a fast start, get some momentum built up, and they play pretty good at home. They're very good in that dome. They're not as good when they get on the road, but if you get off to a hot start to build some confidence up, then when you get into the meat of the season, you never know whose injuries or, again, they're walking in on Thursday night into Philadelphia, and they don't have to worry about Carson Wentz. They're getting Nick Foles, who's come off of a very shaky preseason, so you're really not sure what you're going to get out of him. They have multiple games of film on him now, plus they played him last year, so you never know now that run is over, that maybe Atlanta comes in as the hungrier team at this point. So, yeah, I really like them. I like them to be over 9. All right, let's finish up this NFC South. Let's talk about the New Orleans Saints. The Saints were a surprise team last year and what they did towards the end of the year because they didn't look very good early in the year. Started the season out 0-2. Remember, they went on Monday Night Football. They got whipped by the Minnesota Vikings in the one game Sam Bradford showed up for them last year. But, boy, they came roaring back. They hit everybody with a 2-headed monster in Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara. They didn't ask Drew Brees to do as much on this team. They'll actually maybe get a break in the fact that Mark Ingram is on the suspension list for 4 games. So we talk about running backs all the time getting worn down. Well, there's 4 games that Ingram doesn't have to play. And it seems the plan is to kind of keep Kamara's role the same way and to not overuse and abuse him early in the season just because Ingram's not there, to kind of fill in the Ingram role with other guys and let Alvin Kamara do his thing. The big question here, though, Eric, is the fact that even when the playoffs, when they got rolling, the Saints last year, they looked good. They went into that Minnesota game and they got beat in a way that probably none of their fan base could ever imagine them losing a game to Minnesota like that in walk-off fashion. But we saw that as important as the running game was for the Saints, it still took Drew Brees to bring that team back when they got down in that playoff game and get them in a position to have the lead, and their defense sort of gave it up there at the end. Brees, though, is 39 years old. There's a lot of expectation now on this team. Vegas thinks that they're going to win the division. Obviously, you think Atlanta's going to be there, but let me ask you about Brees. At 39 years old, can he get this team in a position to go back to another Super Bowl?
I'm not going to doubt a guy like Drew Brees because I think his age is almost a non-factor, the same way that Tom Brady's is. Neither one of them are mobile guys. We're not talking about whether or not they're going to get their 40 or 50 rushing yards out of the pocket per game. It's not a situation like that. So they're going to be more interested, can they throw between 3,500 and 5,000 yards for the season? And I think the answer is still yes for Drew Brees. The problem is you do have that age factor, and then you do have the backup QB factor if Brees goes down. I feel like the Saints are much like the Patriots because it's just a really all or nothing kind of situation. Now, that's not because they don't have good weapons around, same as the Patriots. They've got a lot of role players. I think the way the Saints have built their offense is really a good way to do things if you're going to have a spread it around, everybody play their role type of offense. But through the years, you've lost guys like Colston and you've lost guys like Snead and you've lost guys. So, you have stars now like Michael Thomas, but the revolving door of wide receivers to me is very confusing in New Orleans because with a quarterback as prolific as Drew Brees, I get sometimes kind of surprised at how some of these guys don't last in New Orleans. So it's every year you're not sure if you're going to have superstars in wide receiver for the Saints or guys that maybe catch, 70 balls and go for 750 yards. You just don't know, and it's very confusing. And so with Ingram out, I love Kamara. He's another player that I love to watch play for how exciting he is. But I think there's really a stacked deck against this team because they're so dependent on one or two guys on their offense. Their defense has really showed up in tight spots.